I was finishing my morning coffee when the doorbell rang with such aggressive persistence that I nearly spilled the entire cup down my shirt. Through the window, I could see a woman in her mid-50s wearing a power suit that screamed, "I need to speak to your manager," standing on my porch with a clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. Her blonde hair was styled in that particular way that somehow manages to look both expensive and deeply unreasonable at the same time. I opened the door, and she immediately thrust a stack of papers at me without so much as a hello. "I'm Barbara Henderson, president of the Riverside Oaks Homeowners Association. You need to sign these covenants immediately. You're already 3 weeks past the deadline." I looked down at the papers, then back at her. "I'm sorry, what?" "The covenants," she repeated, her voice dripping with impatience. "Every homeowner in Riverside Oaks is required to sign them within 30 days of moving in. You moved in almost 2 months ago. I'd bought my property in this quiet corner of Georgia about 8 weeks prior. It was a beautiful piece of land, 5 acres with a restored farmhouse from the 1920s, sitting at the end of a long private road. I'd fallen in love with it the moment I saw it, and the price had been surprisingly reasonable. Now I was beginning to understand why. I wasn't aware I was part of any HOA, I said carefully. Barbara's eyes narrowed. Your property is within the boundaries of Riverside Oaks. That makes you subject to our authority. These covenants outline the rules you must follow regarding property maintenance, exterior modifications, noise ordinances, and dues structure. How much are the dues? I asked, flipping through the pages. The document was at least 40 pages long, filled with dense legal language and restrictions on everything from what color you could paint your shutters to what hours you could run a lawnmower. $500 per month, Barbara said, as if this was perfectly reasonable. Plus, special assessments as needed for community improvements. I nearly choked. $6,000 a year? The community standards don't maintain themselves, Mr. Patterson. Now, if you'll just sign on page 37, we can get you into compliance. Something about her tone rubbed me the wrong way. I'd done my due diligence before buying this property. My attorney had reviewed everything. I'm going to need some time to review this with my lawyer. Barbara's face flushed. There's nothing to review. This is non-negotiable. You live in Riverside Oaks, you follow Riverside Oaks rules. I'll get back to you, I said, and closed the door before she could respond. Through the window, I watched her stand there for a solid minute, apparently shocked that I hadn't immediately capitulated. Finally, she spun on her heel and marched back to her silver Lexus SUV, leaving tire marks on my gravel driveway as she peeled out. I immediately called my real estate attorney, Marcus Webb. He'd handled my property purchase and had been thorough to the point of obsession. If there was an HOA involved, he would have told me. Tom, good to hear from you, Marcus answered on the second ring. How's the new place? Potentially complicated. I just had a visit from someone claiming to be the president of an HOA that apparently governs my property. She wants me to sign covenants and pay $500 a month in dues. There was a long pause. That's impossible. I reviewed every document associated with that property. There was no HOA disclosure, no covenants in the deed, nothing. What's the name of this HOA? Riverside Oaks. I heard papers rustling in the background. Give me an hour. I'm pulling all the records again. Don't sign anything. Wasn't planning on it. The next morning, Barbara was back, this time with reinforcements. 2 other women stood behind her, both wearing similar expressions of righteous indignation. I recognized the type immediately. People who'd found a small amount of power and decided to wield it like a weapon. Mr. Patterson, this is Jennifer Marsh, our vice president, and Susan Collins, our treasurer. We're here to discuss your non-compliance. I haven't refused to comply with anything, I said evenly. I simply told you I needed to review the documents with my attorney. That was yesterday, Barbara snapped. We require immediate action on covenant violations. What violations? I haven't signed your covenants, which means I'm not bound by them. Susan, a thin woman with glasses that magnified her disapproving glare, stepped forward. Your property is in violation of multiple ordinances. Your grass is over 4 inches tall, you have a vehicle parked in your driveway instead of in a garage, and your front porch light isn't the approved warm white tone. I stared at her. You're joking. This is no joke, Mr. Patterson. Each violation carries a fine of $100 per day until corrected. So let me get this straight. You want me to pay you $6,000 a year? Plus you're trying to fine me $300 per day for violations of rules I never agreed to follow? Jennifer spoke for the first time. The rules exist whether you agreed to them or not. When you purchased property in Riverside Oaks, you accepted the covenants. Show me where. Show me in my deed, in my title, anywhere in my closing documents where it says I'm part of this HOA. The three women exchanged glances. It's implied by the location of your property, Barbara said. Implied isn't legally binding. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. We'll be back with citations, Barbara threatened, and if you don't comply, we'll place a lien on your property. That got my attention. You'll do what? The covenants give us the right to place liens for unpaid dues and fines. If you continue to refuse to comply, we'll foreclose. You're threatening to take my property because I won't follow rules I never agreed to? We're informing you of the consequences of your choices, Barbara said primly. Good day, Mr. Patterson. After they left, I called Marcus again. They're threatening to lien my property. They can't do that without legal standing. I've been digging into this Riverside Oaks HOA. Tom, it's interesting. The HOA was formed 15 years ago when a developer built a small subdivision about 2 miles from your property. Your land was never part of that development. Whoever's running this HOA seems to have decided they have jurisdiction over a much larger area than they actually do. So I'm definitely not part of their HOA? Not even close. Your property predates their HOA by about 90 years. They have absolutely no authority over you. Then why are they so insistent? I'm still working on that. But I did find something interesting. Do you remember that easement mentioned in your deed? The one for the private road leading to your property? I did remember it. The road leading to my house was about a half-mile long, running from the main highway through some woods before reaching my land. Yeah, what about it? That road is actually owned by you. Your property includes the road itself. But according to the original deed from 1924, your great-grandfather, who owned the property before it was sold out of your family, granted an easement allowing others to use the road to access their properties. When the Riverside Oaks development was built, the developer chose to run their main access road through that private road for the first quarter mile before it branches off to the subdivision. I sat down. Wait, so they're using my road to access their subdivision? Exactly. And here's where it gets better. I found the original easement agreement. It's a lease, actually. The developer paid your great-grandfather $200 a year for the right to use that road. The lease was written for 99 years. Okay, so they have the right to use it. They did. But here's the thing. When the developer sold the subdivision to the HOA 15 years ago, someone was supposed to ensure the lease payments continued. I've been checking with the property records and your family trust accounts. Tom, they haven't paid a dime in over 15 years. I felt a slow smile spreading across my face. So they're using my road without paying for it? And the lease specifically states that if payments lapse for more than 6 months, the property owner has the right to revoke the easement with 30 days' notice. How much back payment are they into me for? 15 years at $200 per year, plus the lease includes a clause for inflation adjustments. With calculations, you're looking at about $4,000 in back payments. But Tom, here's the thing. If you revoke that easement, they'd have to build a completely new access road to their subdivision. That would cost them probably close to $200,000, maybe more. They'd need to acquire new right-of-way, do environmental studies, paving, drainage. It would be a nightmare. Does the HOA know about this? I don't know. It's possible this Barbara Henderson has no idea. The original developer might have handled the payments personally, and when the HOA took over, this detail got lost in the shuffle, or someone knows and has been hoping you'd never find out. I need copies of everything. The original easement, the lease agreement, proof that payments have lapsed, all of it. I'll have it couriered to you by this afternoon. The documents arrived at 3 p.m., delivered by a professional courier service. I spent the evening reading through every page, making notes, and forming a plan. The lease was written in the formal language of 1924, but it was crystal clear. The developer of what would eventually become Riverside Oaks had paid my great-grandfather for road access. The payments were to be made annually by January 1st of each year. The last recorded payment was in 2010. The next morning, I drafted a formal letter to the Riverside Oaks HOA. I kept it professional but direct. I was not, had never been, and would never be a member of their HOA. My property was not subject to their covenants. However, I was aware that they were currently using my private road under an expired lease. I was willing to negotiate a new lease agreement, but all back payments would need to be settled first. I sent the letter via certified mail and emailed a copy to the address listed on their covenant documents. Then I waited. Barbara showed up at my door less than 3 hours later. Her face was the color of a ripe tomato. This letter is outrageous," she sputtered, waving a printout of my email. "You can't extort this HOA." "I'm not extorting anyone. I'm informing you that you're using my property without compensation. The lease is quite clear. That road is public access. It's been used by this community for decades. It's a private road on private property. Your developer knew that, which is why he signed a lease in 1924. This is absurd. You can't possibly expect us to pay you thousands of dollars for a road that's already built. I expect you to honor the legal agreement your predecessor signed. Alternatively, you can stop using my road and build your own access." Barbara's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "You can't bar us from the road. We have rights. You have rights granted by a lease that you haven't honored in 15 years, which means, legally, you currently have no rights at all. I'm being generous by offering to negotiate a new lease." "I'll have our attorney contact you," Barbara said stiffly, "and you'll be hearing from the county about your violations." "What violations?" "Blocking public access roads is illegal in Georgia." "Good thing I'm not blocking any public roads. Have a nice day, Barbara." She left muttering threats under her breath. I wasn't particularly worried. Everything I'd said was backed up by solid legal documentation, but I also knew that people like Barbara Henderson didn't let things go easily. Sure enough, 2 days later, I received a thick envelope from a law firm in Atlanta. The letter was full of legal bluster, claiming that I was attempting to illegally extort money from the HOA, that my claims about the road were spurious, and that if I persisted in this course of action, they would seek damages for harassment and emotional distress. I forwarded the letter to Marcus, who called me back laughing. "They've got nothing. This is intimidation tactics, pure and simple. They're hoping you'll back down if they make enough noise." "I'm not backing down." "Good. I'll draft a response. But Tom, you should know if you actually revoke this easement, it's going to be a massive problem for them. That subdivision has about 80 homes in it. They'd all be landlocked without access to your road." "Maybe they should have kept up with their lease payments." "I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying this is going to get ugly before it gets resolved." He was right. Over the next week, I received 3 more letters from the HOA's attorney, each more aggressive than the last. Barbara drove by my house at least twice a day, slowing down to glare at me if I was outside. Someone filed a complaint with the county zoning office, claiming I was running an illegal business from my property. The inspector showed up, looked around my very residential home, found nothing, and left with an apology. Then, the local newspaper got involved. Someone had tipped them off about the dispute between a homeowner and the HOA. A reporter named Sarah Chen called me for comment. "Mr. Patterson, I understand you're demanding the HOA pay you thousands of dollars for road access? That's not quite accurate. There's an existing lease for road access that hasn't been honored in 15 years. I've simply asked that the terms of that lease be fulfilled. The HOA claims you're trying to extort them. The HOA has been using my private property without payment or permission. I'm not sure how asking to be compensated for the use of my property constitutes extortion. Can you provide documentation of this lease?" "I can. Can you hold for a moment?" I sent her copies of the original easement, the lease agreement, and the payment history showing the 15-year gap. There was a long silence as she reviewed the documents. "Mr. Patterson, this is remarkable. Have you considered what will happen to the residents of Riverside Oaks if you revoke this easement?" "I don't want to revoke anything. I want the HOA to honor a legal agreement. If they'd prefer to negotiate new terms, I'm open to that conversation. But I'm not going to pretend this lease doesn't exist just because it's inconvenient for them." "And if they refuse to pay?" Then I'll exercise my legal rights under the lease and revoke the easement. What happens after that is up to them." The article ran 2 days later, and it was surprisingly balanced. Sarah had clearly done her homework, presenting both the HOA's claims and the documented evidence I'd provided. The comments section on the newspaper's website was entertaining. Most people seemed to think the HOA had gotten themselves into this mess and needed to deal with the consequences. But not everyone agreed. Barbara launched a campaign to paint me as a villain, holding the community hostage. She sent letters to all the Riverside Oaks residents, claiming I was trying to destroy their property values and prevent them from accessing their homes. She organized a community meeting to discuss options for dealing with me. I wasn't invited to the meeting, but I heard about it from an unexpected source. On a Friday evening, a man in his late 30s knocked on my door. He introduced himself as David Reeves, a resident of Riverside Oaks and a civil engineer. "Mr. Patterson, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I wanted to talk to you about this road situation." "Sure, come in." We sat in my living room and David got straight to the point. "I'm not here on behalf of the HOA. Actually, I'm here against Barbara's wishes. She told all the residents that you're an unreasonable person trying to extort us. But I read the newspaper article, and I did my own research. You're absolutely right. The HOA hasn't paid the lease in over 15 years. I appreciate you saying that. Here's the thing. Most of the residents have no idea about any of this. Barbara and her board run the HOA like their personal fiefdom. They make decisions without consulting the community. They spend money on ridiculous things, and they've been raising dues every year without proper justification. A lot of us are frustrated, but fighting an HOA from the inside is almost impossible. Why are you telling me this? Because I think you might have leverage that we don't. Barbara's terrified of this road situation. At the meeting tonight, she was talking about using HOA funds to hire a more aggressive law firm, maybe even filing a lawsuit against you for interference with property rights. But she let something slip. She mentioned that if the HOA has to pay for a new access road, it would bankrupt the association. We'd have to levy a special assessment of about $3,000 per household. I let out a low whistle. That would not be popular. It would be a disaster. Half the residents would probably stop paying, the HOA would collapse, and the whole subdivision would be in chaos. But here's what I think you should know. The HOA currently has about $200,000 in reserve funds. Barbara claims those funds are earmarked for future community improvements, but there's no specific plan for them. That money could easily cover your back lease payments and fund a reasonable ongoing lease. So why won't she pay? Pride, I think, and control. If she admits the HOA has been wrong about this, it undermines her authority. She's been president for 8 years, and she's used to getting her way. The idea of backing down to you is unacceptable to her. What do you want me to do? David leaned forward. Keep pushing. Don't back down. Eventually, the rest of the board or the residents will force her hand. She's been running the HOA into the ground for years, and this might be the crisis that finally gets people to pay attention. After David left, I thought about what he'd said. I didn't particularly want to be at war with an entire subdivision, but I also wasn't going to let Barbara Henderson bully me into signing away my rights or allowing her to use my property for free. The next Monday, I received a letter from a new law firm. This one was from a litigation specialist in Atlanta, known for aggressive tactics. The letter informed me that I was being sued for tortious interference, claiming that my demands were preventing the HOA from fulfilling its duties to its members. They were seeking $50,000 in damages. Marcus was less amused this time. They're serious about this. It's a garbage lawsuit, but it'll cost money to defend and tie you up for months. Can they win? No, but that's not the point. They're trying to make fighting them so expensive and exhausting that you give up. I'm not giving up. Then we fight. I'll file a motion to dismiss and we'll countersue for the back lease payments plus legal fees. The lawsuit made the newspaper again. Sarah Chen called me for a follow-up article, and this time the tone of the community comments shifted. People were angry that the HOA was spending their dues money on a lawsuit instead of just paying a legitimate debt. Several residents started asking questions about HOA finances and how decisions were being made. Barbara doubled down. She sent out a newsletter claiming that I was a vexatious litigant trying to destroy the community. She held another meeting where she asked residents to contribute to a legal defense fund. According to David, who attended the meeting, about 3 people showed up and nobody contributed any money. Then, something unexpected happened. I got a visit from 2 other board members, Jennifer and Susan, the same women who'd accompanied Barbara on her second visit to my house. They showed up without Barbara, both looking nervous. "Mr. Patterson, we need to talk," Jennifer said. "All right." They sat on my porch, uncomfortable and clearly out of their element. Susan spoke first. "We didn't know about the lease. Barbara told us that you were making it up, that you were trying to scam the HOA. But Jennifer's husband is a lawyer, and he looked into it. You're telling the truth." "I am." "We want to settle this," Jennifer said. "We want to pay you the back lease payments and negotiate a new agreement. But Barbara won't agree. She's convinced that if we give in to you, it'll set a precedent and people will think they can push the HOA around." "This has nothing to do with pushing anyone around. I just want to be compensated for the use of my property." "We know that now," Susan said. "But Barbara won't listen to us. She's threatening to remove us from the board if we don't support her position." "Can she do that?" "Technically, no. But she's very good at making life difficult for people who disagree with her. Most board members eventually resign because it's not worth the hassle." "What do you want from me?" Jennifer hesitated. "We want to call a special meeting of the entire HOA membership. If we can get enough residents to show up, we can vote to overrule Barbara and authorize the settlement. But we need you to agree not to revoke the easement before the meeting. We need 2 weeks to organize it and notify everyone." "And if the residents vote to support Barbara instead?" "Then we'll resign from the board, and you can do whatever you want with the easement. But we don't think that'll happen. Most people just want this resolved." I considered their offer. 2 weeks wasn't long, and I had nothing to lose by waiting. All right, I'll hold off on any action for 2 weeks. But if this meeting doesn't result in a resolution, I'm moving forward with revoking the easement." They both looked relieved. "Thank you. We'll be in touch." The special meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening at the Riverside Oaks Community Center, which was apparently a fancy name for a small building with a meeting room and a kitchenette. I wasn't sure if I should attend until David called me the day before. "You should be there," he said. "People need to see that you're a reasonable person, not the monster Barbara's made you out to be." "Won't my presence just escalate things?" "Maybe, but I think it's worth the risk." I arrived at the community center at 7 p.m. just as the meeting was starting. The parking lot was packed, and I had to park on the street. Inside, about 60 people were crammed into a room designed for maybe 40. Barbara stood at the front, her face already flushed with anger. The moment I walked in, the room went silent. Barbara's eyes locked onto me. "What are you doing here? This is a private meeting for HOA members only." "I invited him," David said, standing up. "This meeting is about him, so he should have the right to be here." "This is highly irregular," Barbara sputtered. "So is suing someone instead of paying a legitimate debt," someone called out from the back. Barbara tried to regain control. "Everyone, please. We're here to discuss the situation with Mr. Patterson and the alleged road lease. I want to be clear. Our attorney has advised us that Mr. Patterson's claims are dubious at best and fraudulent at worst. We are not obligated to pay him anything." Jennifer stood up. "That's not true, Barbara. Multiple attorneys have reviewed the lease. It's legitimate." "Jennifer, you're out of order." "No, Barbara, you're out of order. You've been lying to this community about the legal situation, and you've been wasting our money on a lawsuit we can't win." The room erupted in crosstalk. Barbara banged a gavel on the table. "I am the president of this HOA, and I will not be spoken to this way." "Then maybe you shouldn't be president anymore," someone called out. I raised my hand, and surprisingly, people quieted down. "If I may, I'd like to say something." Barbara looked like she wanted to refuse, but the room was clearly waiting to hear from me. She gave a curt nod. "Yes, I'm not here to hurt anyone or to take advantage of this community. I bought my property in good faith, and I was unaware of the HOA's existence until Barbara showed up demanding I sign covenants. When I researched my property, I discovered the road lease. It's a legitimate legal document, and the HOA has been using my road without payment for 15 years. I've asked for the back payments and a new lease agreement. That's all. I'm not trying to block anyone's access or cause problems, but I also won't be bullied into giving up my legal rights. A woman in the front row raised her hand. How much are you asking for? $4,000 in back payments, adjusted for inflation. For a new lease, I'd be willing to accept $300 per year, which is less than $4 per household annually. There was murmuring in the room. The numbers were far lower than what Barbara had apparently been telling people. That's very reasonable, David said. Barbara, we have over $200,000 in reserve funds. We can easily afford this. Those funds are allocated for community improvements, Barbara said sharply. What improvements? Someone asked. You've been saying that for years, but we never see any improvements. The playground is falling apart, the community center roof leaks, and the landscaping at the entrance is dead. Barbara's face grew redder. How dare you question my management of this HOA? I have given 8 years of my life to this community. And you've raised our dues every single year, another person called out. We're paying $500 a month, which is the highest of any HOA in the county. Where is all that money going? This was spiraling out of my control, but I had to admit, it was fascinating to watch. Barbara had clearly been running the HOA like her personal kingdom, and now that kingdom was collapsing around her. Susan stood up, holding a folder. I've been reviewing the HOA financial records, and I found some concerning discrepancies. Over the past 5 years, we've paid over $30,000 to a property management company called Henderson Properties for various services. Barbara, isn't that your husband's company? The room went dead silent. Barbara's face had gone from red to pale. That's a legitimate business arrangement. We needed management services. But we already pay you a stipend as president to handle management. Why are we also paying your husband's company? This is a witch hunt, Barbara said, her voice shaking. I will not stand here and be accused of impropriety. Then maybe we should have an independent audit, Jennifer said. I move that we immediately authorize an independent audit of all HOA finances for the past 5 years. I second, David said. Barbara looked around the room desperately. You can't do this. I'll resign. Is that what you want? Yes, at least a dozen people said in unison. Barbara gathered her papers, her hands trembling. Fine. You're all ungrateful, every one of you. I've worked tirelessly for this community, and this is how you repay me. I quit. She stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Jennifer took a deep breath and moved to the front of the room. All right. As vice president, I'm assuming the role of acting president until we can hold elections. First order of business. I move that we authorize payment to Mr. Patterson of $4,000 for back lease payments and approve a new lease agreement at $300 per year for continued use of his road. Seconded, Susan said. All in favor? A chorus of "aye" filled the room. Not a single person opposed. Motion passes. Mr. Patterson, I apologize for how you've been treated. We'll have a check for you within a week, and we'll work with your attorney to draft the new lease. I stood up. Thank you, and for what it's worth, I appreciate you all taking the time to hear me out. As I left the meeting, several people stopped me to shake my hand or apologize. David walked me to my car. Well, that was dramatic, I said. You have no idea. Barbara's been a tyrant for years. You might have just saved this HOA. I was just trying to protect my property rights. Sometimes that's all it takes to shine a light on corruption. The next week, I received a check from the Riverside Oaks HOA for $4,000, along with a formal letter of apology signed by Jennifer, Susan, and the other board members. Marcus drafted a new lease agreement that was fair to both parties, giving the HOA continued access to my road for $300 per year with reasonable terms for maintenance and liability. But the story didn't end there. The independent audit that Jennifer had called for revealed that Barbara and her husband had been funneling money from the HOA for years. The management services from Henderson Properties were largely fictional. Over 5 years, they'd taken nearly $40,000 from the HOA funds. Additionally, Barbara had been approving payments to vendors who gave her kickbacks, inflating costs for routine maintenance and keeping the difference. The HOA board filed a complaint with the Georgia Secretary of State's office and consulted with a criminal attorney. The evidence was overwhelming. Barbara had been treating the HOA like her personal piggy bank, using her position to enrich herself while threatening and bullying anyone who questioned her authority. I got another call from Sarah Chen, the reporter. "Mr. Patterson, I'm doing a follow-up story on the Riverside Oaks situation. The HOA has filed a civil suit against Barbara Henderson and her husband for embezzlement and fraud. They're also considering criminal charges. Do you have any comment?" "I'm just glad the truth came out. I never wanted any of this, but I think the community is better off knowing what was happening. Do you think your situation was what exposed the financial irregularities?" "I think my situation gave people permission to start asking questions. Barbara had created an environment where nobody felt like they could challenge her. Once that dynamic broke, everything else came tumbling down." The article ran with the headline, "HOA President Accused of Embezzling Thousands After Road Lease Dispute." It detailed Barbara's financial schemes and how my refusal to back down had inadvertently exposed years of misconduct. The legal proceedings against Barbara and her husband took several months to unfold. The HOA sued them in civil court for the return of the embezzled funds plus damages. Barbara's attorney tried to argue that the payments were legitimate, but the audit trail was too clear. Henderson Properties had billed for services never rendered, maintenance that was never performed, and consulting fees that had no documentation. In September, about 5 months after this whole mess started, I got a call from Jennifer. "Tom, I wanted to let you know that Barbara and her husband agreed to a settlement. They're paying back $50,000 to the HOA and surrendering any claim to HOA property or assets. They're also barred from serving on any HOA board in Georgia for 10 years. That's good news. It gets better. The district attorney decided to file criminal charges. They're both being charged with theft by taking and computer fraud. They accessed HOA accounts and falsified records to cover their tracks. The DA thinks it's a strong case." I felt a mix of emotions. I'd never wanted to destroy anyone's life, but Barbara had brought this on herself through years of dishonesty and abuse of power. "What about the residents? How are they handling all this?" "Actually really well. We've reduced the monthly dues to $250. Turns out we were paying for a lot of things we didn't need, plus covering Barbara's theft. We've also reformed the bylaws to require financial transparency and regular audits. There's a real sense of community now that Barbara's gone. People are getting involved, volunteering. It's like a weight has been lifted. I'm glad something good came out of this mess. Tom, you should come to our fall festival next month. We'd love to have you. You're part of the reason this community is healing." I did attend the fall festival. It was a beautiful October day, and the community center grounds were decorated with hay bales, pumpkins, and colorful banners. Kids ran around playing games while adults manned booths, selling baked goods and crafts. David found me near the food truck area. "Tom, glad you could make it. How's life been treating you?" "Quiet, thankfully. I've had enough excitement to last a lifetime." "Well, you're something of a legend around here. The man who stood up to Barbara Henderson and won. I just wanted to be left alone on my property. Sometimes the right thing to do is the simple thing. You didn't back down when you knew you were right." As the sun set over the festival, I reflected on the past several months. I'd moved to Georgia looking for peace and quiet, a place to settle down after years of city living. Instead, I'd found myself in a battle with an HOA president who'd been running a criminal enterprise disguised as community management. But in fighting for my own rights, I'd accidentally helped an entire community free itself from a corrupt leader. The residents of Riverside Oaks were now in control of their own HOA, making decisions collectively instead of being dictated to by one person. They'd learned the importance of oversight, transparency, and holding leaders accountable. The criminal case against Barbara and her husband went to trial in December. I was called as a witness, though my testimony was brief. I simply explained how the road lease dispute had started and how I'd discovered the unpaid lease. The prosecution used my situation as the opening example of Barbara's pattern of dishonesty and disregard for legal obligations. The financial crimes were the heart of the case. Prosecutors presented bank records, forged invoices, and testimony from vendors who'd been pressured into providing kickbacks. One landscaping company owner testified that Barbara had threatened to cancel his contract unless he gave her 10% of every payment in cash. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Both Barbara and her husband were found guilty on multiple counts of theft and fraud. Barbara received a sentence of 3 years in prison with 2 years suspended, meaning she'd serve 1 year behind bars followed by probation. Her husband got 6 months in jail and probation. They were also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, which would come from the sale of their own home and other assets. I watched the news coverage of the sentencing from my living room. Barbara looked broken as she stood before the judge, a far cry from the aggressive woman who'd shown up at my door demanding I sign covenants. Part of me felt sorry for her, but mostly I felt relief that justice had been served. Sarah Chen did a final article on the case titled "From Road Dispute to Prison: How One HOA President's Greed Led to Downfall." She interviewed me one last time. "Mr. Patterson, looking back, do you regret getting involved in all this?" "I didn't really have a choice. Barbara came to me making demands. I just stood my ground." "But you could have signed the covenants, paid the dues, avoided all this conflict?" "I could have, but I would have been agreeing to rules I never legally consented to, giving up my property rights, and paying money I didn't owe. Plus, I would have been funding an organization that was stealing from its own members. Sometimes avoiding conflict isn't the right choice." "What advice would you give to people dealing with difficult HOAs?" "Document everything, know your rights, get good legal advice, and don't back down just because someone acts like they have authority. Real authority comes from legitimate legal standing, not from being loud or aggressive." The article struck a chord. I received emails from people all over the country dealing with their own HOA nightmares. Some were fighting unreasonable fines, others were battling corrupt board members, and a few had discovered financial irregularities similar to what we'd found at Riverside Oaks. I couldn't help everyone, but I shared Marcus's contact information and encouraged people to know their rights and stand firm. Life eventually settled into a comfortable routine. The Riverside Oaks HOA paid their annual lease fee on time every January. Jennifer served as president for 2 years before stepping down, replaced by David in a friendly election. The community thrived under transparent leadership, and property values actually increased as people learned about the HOA's reform efforts. I became friendly with several Riverside Oaks residents, occasionally attending community events or helping out with projects. The hostile relationship that Barbara had tried to create between me and the subdivision had transformed into mutual respect and even friendship. One afternoon in spring, almost a year after everything had settled, I was working in my garden when a car pulled into my driveway. I tensed for a moment, old habits dying hard but relaxed when I saw it was Jennifer. She got out carrying a framed document. "Tom, we wanted to give you something. The HOA board commissioned this and we had every resident sign it." It was a proclamation printed on heavy parchment paper in formal script. "In recognition of Tom Patterson, whose courage and integrity helped reveal corruption and restore honest leadership to the Riverside Oaks community. Your unwillingness to compromise your principles, even under pressure, inspired us to demand better from our own leadership. Thank you for being a neighbor who stands for what's right." Below were dozens of signatures, every household in Riverside Oaks. I was genuinely touched. "Thank you. This means a lot. We mean it. You changed our community for the better, even though that was never your intention. Sometimes the best heroes are the ones who just refuse to be victims." After Jennifer left, I hung the proclamation in my study. It served as a reminder that standing up for yourself can have ripples far beyond your own situation. I just wanted to protect my property rights and be left alone. Instead, I'd ended up exposing a criminal operation, helping a community reclaim its autonomy, and seeing justice served against people who'd abused their power. The quiet life I'd been seeking eventually arrived. My days were filled with maintaining my property, working on restoration projects around the old farmhouse, and enjoying the peace of 5 acres in rural Georgia. The road that had caused so much conflict was just a road again, a gravel path through the woods that I maintained well and that my neighbors used respectfully. Marcus and I stayed in touch, and he occasionally used my case as an example in seminars about property rights and HOA law. The Patterson case, he'd call it, explaining how a simple property dispute had revealed systemic corruption and resulted in criminal convictions. I sometimes wondered what would have happened if I'd just signed Barbara's covenants that first day, if I'd chosen the path of least resistance. The HOA would have continued operating as Barbara's personal fiefdom. She and her husband would have kept stealing, residents would have kept paying inflated dues for substandard services, and I would have given up rights I'd never actually been obligated to surrender. Instead, because I'd done my homework, consulted good legal advice, and refused to be intimidated, everything had changed. Barbara was a convicted felon. The HOA was reformed and functioning properly. An entire community had learned the importance of accountability and transparency. And I'd become an unexpected advocate for homeowners' rights. On warm evenings, I'd sit on my porch, watching the sunset over my property, listening to the sounds of the Georgia woods. Occasionally, I'd see cars driving down my road, heading to or from Riverside Oaks, and I'd smile knowing that the arrangement was now fair and legal for everyone involved. The local newspaper did an anniversary article a year after Barbara's conviction, checking in on how Riverside Oaks was doing. The HOA was thriving, dues were lower, property values were up, and resident satisfaction was at an all-time high. Sarah Chen interviewed several residents who talked about how much better things were under the new leadership. She also interviewed me again. Tom, a year later, any regrets? None. It was stressful at the time, but worth it. You've become something of a folk hero in the property rights community. How does that feel? I laughed. Strange, honestly. I'm just a guy who bought a house and didn't want to be pushed around. But if my experience helps other people stand up for themselves, that's a good thing. What would you say to someone in a similar situation right now, facing pressure from an HOA or any other organization? I'd say knowledge is power. Understand your legal rights, document everything in writing, get professional advice from attorneys who specialize in the relevant area. And don't let anyone intimidate you into giving up rights you legitimately have. Bullies rely on people backing down. When you stand firm, especially when you have the law on your side, they usually collapse. The article ended with a photo of me standing on my property, the private road visible in the background. The caption read, "Tom Patterson on the road that sparked a revolution in HOA accountability." I had that photo framed too, not out of pride, but as a reminder of an important lesson. Sometimes the most significant changes start with one person simply refusing to accept something unjust. I hadn't set out to take down a corrupt HOA president or reform an entire community's governance. I just wanted to be left alone to enjoy my property in peace. But when Barbara Henderson had shown up demanding I sign covenants and pay dues for an HOA I'd never joined, then threatened to lien my property for refusing, she'd picked the wrong fight. And when I discovered that her organization was using my road without payment, everything had changed. The look on Barbara's face when I'd presented the lease documents in that community center meeting would stay with me forever. The panic in her eyes as she realized her house of cards was collapsing. She'd been so confident in her authority, so certain that she could bully me into submission, that she'd never considered I might have leverage of my own. That's the thing about tyrants, whether they're running countries or homeowners associations. They're paper tigers. Their power exists only as long as people submit to it. The moment someone stands up and challenges them, especially with facts and law on their side, that power evaporates. As winter approached again, I found myself preparing for the Riverside Oaks holiday party. It had become an annual tradition, and Jennifer had insisted I attend as guest of honor. I'd initially declined, but David had called to persuade me. "Tom, these people want to celebrate you. Let them. You did something remarkable, even if you don't think so." So I'd agreed. At the party, held in a community center that had been renovated with properly managed HOA funds, I was greeted like a returning hero. People thanked me for what I'd done, shared stories of how things had improved, and expressed genuine gratitude. An older woman named Margaret approached me with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Patterson, I want to thank you personally. My late husband and I bought our house in Riverside Oaks 20 years ago. We watched Barbara Henderson take over the HOA and turn it into something ugly. My husband tried to challenge her once about where the money was going, and she made his life miserable. He died 3 years ago, and I always regretted that he never saw her held accountable. You did what he couldn't. Thank you. Moments like that made everything worthwhile. This had never been about me versus Barbara, or me versus an HOA. It had been about right versus wrong, about accountability versus corruption, about standing firm versus giving in to intimidation. As I drove home that night, my private road lit by a clear winter moon, I thought about how strange life could be. I'd moved to Georgia seeking solitude and simplicity. Instead, I'd found conflict, legal battles, and ultimately, a kind of redemption for an entire community. The road beneath my tires was the same road that had sparked everything. A simple gravel path through the woods, unremarkable except for the legal history attached to it. But because I'd known my rights, because I'd stood firm when challenged, because I'd refused to be intimidated by someone abusing a position of authority, that unremarkable road had become the key to exposing corruption and bringing justice. I thought about all the people who'd faced similar situations and backed down because it seemed easier than fighting. I understood that impulse. Fighting is exhausting. Legal battles are stressful. Standing alone against an organization feels daunting. But sometimes fighting is necessary. Sometimes standing alone reveals that you're not actually alone at all. The residents of Riverside Oaks had been waiting for someone to challenge Barbara. They'd been frustrated with her leadership but felt powerless to change it. When I'd stood up to her over the road lease, I'd shown them that she wasn't invincible. And once they'd realized that, they'd found their own courage to demand accountability. That's the real lesson in all this, I realized. One person standing firm can inspire others to do the same. Courage is contagious. So is the pursuit of justice. Back home, I poured myself a drink and sat by the fireplace. On the mantel was the proclamation from the Riverside Oaks residents. On the wall was the newspaper article about the case, and in my file cabinet was the new road lease, properly signed and honored, with regular payments arriving each January. Everything had worked out, not because I was particularly brave or clever, but because I'd simply refused to accept an injustice. Barbara Henderson had demanded I sign covenants I'd never agreed to, pay dues for an HOA I wasn't part of, and submit to authority she didn't legitimately have. When I'd said no and showed her the road lease with my name on it, I'd pulled the thread that unraveled her entire scheme. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person who says no, one person who does their homework, one person who stands on principle when it would be easier to compromise. I hadn't been trying to be a hero. I'd just been trying to protect what was mine. But in protecting my own rights, I'd helped protect everyone else's too. That's how justice works sometimes. You stand up for yourself, and in doing so, you stand up for everyone who couldn't or wouldn't stand up themselves. As I headed to bed that night, I felt at peace. My quiet life in Georgia had been interrupted by conflict, but that conflict had led to something meaningful. Barbara Henderson and her husband were paying for their crimes. The Riverside Oaks community was healthy and well-governed, and I had my property, my rights, and my peace. And I had something else too, the satisfaction of knowing that when someone had tried to bully me, I'd stood firm. When they'd threatened me, I'd held my ground. And when they'd underestimated me, I'd shown them exactly what happens when you try to intimidate someone who knows their rights and refuses to back down. The road outside my house would continue to serve both my property and the Riverside Oaks subdivision for years to come. But it would do so under fair terms, with honest payments, and with mutual respect. That's all I'd ever wanted. That's all anyone should expect. Justice, fairness, and the right to be left alone on your own property. Simple principles that Barbara Henderson had forgotten, simple principles that had ultimately led to her downfall and to the redemption of an entire community. I slept well that night, as I had every night since the case had closed. My conscience was clear, my property was secure, and somewhere in the Georgia woods, on a private road that had sparked a revolution, life went on peacefully, exactly as it should.